I don't care who you are. I'll make sure your boss fires you." That was the slurred threat that came out of Craig Hanlon's mouth across a white linen table at the Avenor renewal dinner. Half a steak in his mouth, the other half bleeding into his designer shirt. My wine glass froze halfway to my lips. The client's pen stopped just above the dotted line on a $50 million renewal. The entire table went still. Forks hovered midair. Conversation died mid-sentence, and the violinist in the corner kept gliding through Vivaldi like we weren't all watching a corporate car crash in slow motion. But to understand that moment, you need to know what came before. My name's Emily Carver, Vice President of Client Architecture at StratoSync Technologies, headquartered in San Francisco. And no, that's not some vanity title. I manage the real work, the kind that keeps the lights on while everyone else fights over buzzwords and equity options. 9 years of contract wins, integration nightmares, and systems so complex that half our executives couldn't even spell them. I built this company's foundation while people like Craig got drunk on their own reflections. The one thing most people don't know? My last name. You'd be amazed how differently you get treated when they don't realize the CEO, Richard Carver, is your father. He built StratoSync from a one-room office in Phoenix. No investors, no safety net, just grit and caffeine. He's the reason the company even exists, but he's also the man who taught me one golden rule. If you have to tell people you're in charge, you aren't. So I kept my head down. I didn't flaunt connections or play politics. I just delivered. Especially on Avenor Holdings, the monster client nobody wanted 6 years ago. Legacy systems older than some of our interns, compliance headaches that scared off every competitor. I turned that account into our highest margin deal. Quietly, efficiently, without needing anyone's validation. Then there was Craig, Director of Strategic Operations, corporate loudmouth, 3-word vocabulary, circle back, alignment, drinks. He lived for noise, the kind of guy who bragged about disruption but couldn't run a project plan without accidentally deleting half the shared folder. From day one, he didn't like me. Too quiet, too focused, not impressed by him. I didn't flirt. I didn't laugh at his recycled jokes. And in his world, that was an offense. Still, for years he mostly floated, sitting in meetings, collecting credit for PowerPoints he barely read. Until the COO, Brad Reed, started talking about streamlining leadership. That phrase in corporate America is code for, someone's getting sacrificed. Suddenly, Craig was everywhere, hovering around my accounts, scheduling meetings that excluded me, whispering about redundant roles and restructuring opportunities. He moved like a shark that smelled blood but didn't realize it was his own. I kept my calm. I documented everything. Client calls recorded, deliverables time-stamped, every meeting note stored twice. Because I've learned the corporate truth, if you're a man, you're assertive. If you're a woman, you're difficult. So I let the receipts speak for me. Then came that dinner. 9 months of negotiations, technical audits, and pricing wars had led to that night. A renewal that would lock in $50 million in revenue and set the tone for the next fiscal year. We were celebrating in a private room at Marcelino's, downtown Manhattan. Crystal glasses, white linens, gold foil menus embossed with StratoSync X Avenor. I'd spent weeks planning every detail. Avenor's CFO, Lucian Grant, was there. A cautious man, allergic to bullshit, loyal only to results. Over the years, we'd built trust the hard way, through late-night calls, shared problem-solving, and knowing each other's small details. His wife's gluten allergy, his favorite VPN vendor, the name of his dog. That's the kind of familiarity Craig would never earn, because he was too busy being loud. So, when Craig stumbled in, red-faced, tie loose, pretending not to be drunk, I already knew disaster was coming. "Emily!" he boomed, clapping me on the back like we were old frat buddies. "Holding down the fort till the big gun show, huh? He dropped into the empty seat beside Lucien and ordered a double whiskey like he was celebrating his own promotion. He hijacked every conversation, interrupted Lucien mid-sentence, bragged about future integrations he couldn't even define. I tried redirecting the talk back to performance metrics, risk mitigation, the renewal roadmap. Lucien's patience thinned. I saw it in the way he checked his watch every few minutes. And then came the toast, Craig's favorite weapon. He raised his glass. Here's to shaking things up, to the future of Avenor and Stratosync, and to clearing out some old habits. Lucien didn't move. Craig wasn't done. He turned to me, smirking, and to Emily, our quiet little overachiever. Don't worry, I'm sure there'll still be some role for you after we restructure. Maybe take that vacation you've been avoiding. God knows Richard's not keeping you here for your charm. The world went still. Lucien's pen froze mid-signature. The air turned cold. I placed my glass down slowly. Actually, I said evenly, Richard's my father. You could hear the oxygen leave the room. Craig blinked, the grin dying on his face like a light switch being flipped. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind that telltale shade of regret people wear when they finally realize they've said something they can't rewind. Lucien slowly capped his pen, the soft click sounding louder than the violin still playing in the background. He turned toward my father, who had been sitting silently at the far end of the table the whole time, watching, measuring, calculating. Lucien's expression didn't change. His voice was calm, but it could have cut glass. Call me when you've sorted this out, he said to my father, and then he stood, nodded to me once, and left the room. No raised voices, no slammed doors. Just $50 million walking out in polished leather shoes. Craig sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish stranded on a dock. I stood, picked up my clutch, and met his stunned gaze. You just set fire to the one thing keeping this company from crumbling, I said quietly. Hope the toast was worth it. Then I turned and walked out. By the time I got home that night, my phone was already vibrating nonstop. Slack pings, email threads, urgent follow-ups. Did something happen at the dinner? Craig said there was a misunderstanding. Just checking. Everything okay with Avenor? Misunderstanding. That was his word of choice. Not humiliation, not insubordination, not sabotage. Just a regrettable miscommunication. As if insulting the CEO's daughter and destroying a contract renewal were on par with sending the wrong meeting link. The next morning, the whispers began. I could feel them before I even stepped off the elevator. Conversations cut off mid-sentence when I walked by. Fake smiles stretching across faces that used to be friendly. Craig had gotten to them first. She only landed Avenor because of Richard, one of the interns whispered near the copy room. The client only trusted her because she's the CEO's kid. Nepotism Barbie. That was the phrase Craig was pushing now. I heard it 3 times before lunch. He was rewriting the story before I could even open my mouth. And my father? He said nothing. I passed him in the hallway once that Monday. No words, just that clipped nod and the steel-set jaw that meant I'm watching how you handle this. He never yelled. He didn't have to. His silence did the work for him. That's when I realized he wasn't ignoring the situation. He was studying it, watching which of his executives scrambled for cover and which ones quietly sharpened their knives. I decided to play my own long game. I went back through 6 months of records, project reports, client emails, Slack threads, internal memos. I built a map of every delay, every cost overrun Craig had caused, every project log he'd doctored to make himself look competent. There were so many breadcrumbs it felt like he'd practically left a trail on purpose. I found one email chain where he reassigned Avenor deliverables to his own team without telling me. Another where he told a junior analyst, just copy last month's KPIs. No one reads them anyway. I documented everything. I labeled it innocuously. Noise reduction. DocX. Timestamps, screenshots, receipts. Nothing emotional, nothing subjective. Just facts. Then I waited. The renewal freeze came 3 days later in a one-line email. Stratosync team, we are formally pausing the Avenor renewal pending internal review. No explanation, no apology. Sent by Lucian himself at 6:17 a.m. By the time I sat down at my desk, the entire floor was buzzing. When your largest client slams the brakes, people suddenly remember your name, and not in a good way. Craig didn't come in that morning. Of course he didn't. He was working remotely, probably drafting the next chapter of his victim narrative. But I had logs, admin access timestamps, account reassignments, project ticket changes. It was all there. Craig rerouting Avenor's files under his own team's permissions. He'd even emailed Brad Reed, our COO. Given recent tensions, I recommend reassigning client interface duties for Avenor to ensure continuity. Translation. Let me steal Emily's account while I blame her for the fallout. That was the last straw. I forwarded the entire chain to my father. Subject line, FWD, Avenor realignment threads. Message body. He's trying to burn the client and blame me. No emotion, no plea, just evidence. Then I closed my laptop and waited for the storm to hit. My father didn't reply to that email. Not a word, not even a read receipt. But silence from Richard Carver never meant inaction. It meant strategy. The man didn't play defense. He played anticipation. If I'd made a move, he was already 5 ahead, watching from a vantage point I couldn't yet see. Meanwhile, I could feel the walls tightening. My inbox was suddenly lighter. Meeting invites I used to receive stopped showing up. Brad, the COO, became mysteriously unavailable. Craig was reshaping the narrative, painting himself as the savior holding the company together, while the CEO's daughter lost her composure. The sexist undertones weren't subtle. I kept showing up. On time, immaculate, polite. If they wanted to watch me crumble, they'd have to wait forever. But inside, I was boiling. Avenor had gone quiet. No emails, no calls. Even their project liaisons stopped answering. I left 2 voicemails and a calendar invite. Nothing. The silence was worse than rejection. And Craig was capitalizing on it. I overheard him one afternoon in the break room, whispering to the CFO's chief of staff. We need to clean house on that legacy account. Fresh eyes, less drama. Fresh eyes, what a joke. The only fresh thing about Craig was the whiskey on his breath. By midweek, rumors started to swirl about an internal review. Leadership accountability, they called it. I knew exactly what that meant. They were prepping paperwork to make me the fall girl. The logic was simple. If the CEO's daughter took the hit, it proved the company was fair. Craig would walk away spotless. But what he didn't know was that I had the receipts, and I was done waiting. Thursday morning, HR called. Emily, could you come up to 17C for a quick chat? That phrase, quick chat, is corporate for career execution. I rode the elevator up, staring at my reflection in the mirrored doors, trying to keep my breathing even. 17C was all glass walls and curated plants, the kind of place built to make bad news feel palatable. Inside sat Tasha from Employee Relations, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, and a young HR partner I didn't recognize, probably borrowed from another department to pretend neutrality. On the table, a printed complaint, filed by Craig Hanlon. The accusations were textbook projection, hostile conduct, inappropriate leveraging of personal relationships, creating a divisive work environment. It was so predictable I almost laughed. Tasha read through the bullet points in a soft, practiced tone, but I barely heard her. My mind was already 3 steps ahead. When she finished, I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim manila folder. Before you continue, I said, sliding it across the table, you might want to look at this. Inside were neatly indexed pages, Craig's forged reports, backdated approvals, Slack screenshots where he'd told analysts to fudge KPIs, internal emails he'd rerouted to remove my name. I watched the new HR partner's face lose color by page 3. Tasha set down her cup of herbal tea, hands trembling slightly. There's also a USB, I added, placing it on top of the folder. Audio recordings from the Avenor dinner. In case the board wants to hear Craig's exact words, unfiltered. Tasha blinked. You recorded the dinner? Not intentionally, I said evenly. Avenor's side always records for quality assurance during client engagements. Their legal team sent me a courtesy copy. You'll find timestamps. She looked like she wanted to melt into the carpet. We'll, need to follow up with the COO? She managed. He's expressed support for Craig's restructuring proposal and will need his input before escalating further. Of course. Brad Reed, Craig's golf buddy and unofficial enabler. Even after seeing proof of misconduct, they were still protecting him. I smiled tightly. No emotion. Understood. Then I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out a sealed envelope. On the front, to be opened by the CEO only. I unclipped my company badge, set it next to the envelope, and said calmly, "You'll have my resignation in 15 minutes. Tasha whispered, "Emily, please." I stood. "I built that client relationship from nothing," I said quietly. "I didn't inherit it, I didn't steal it, and I sure as hell didn't flirt for it. I earned it. And you let a man who's never delivered anything gamble it away." Then I walked out, my heels echoing like a gavel down the hallway. They let Craig pull the trigger, but they had no idea where the bullet was going to land. The moment I walked out of that glass box on 17C, the clock started ticking. My resignation wasn't the end. It was the fuse. Because inside that sealed envelope on my father's desk was a meticulously documented autopsy of Craig's career. Forged metrics, altered reports, client correspondence, and the dinner recording that would later make an entire boardroom go silent. Richard Carver hated surprises, but he respected precision. When that envelope hit his desk, he didn't storm into meetings or start firing people. He did what he'd always done: observe. He waited for everyone else to show their hand. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. No calls, no Slack messages, no emotional outbursts. I just disappeared from the radar, and that scared them more than any confrontation could have. People like Craig thrived on chaos and reaction. Silence made them unravel. By Thursday morning, the ripples had reached the top floor. My father showed up at Avenor's Manhattan headquarters unannounced. No assistant, no entourage, just a man in a charcoal suit walking into the lobby of a company that used to be our biggest client. He was greeted by Lucian Grant, the CFO who'd walked out of that dinner. The handshake never happened. "Follow me," Lucian said curtly, leading him not to the executive floor, but to a small, undecorated meeting room overlooking the loading dock. Symbolic. Avenor didn't do theatrics, they did accountability. Inside were 3 people: Avenor's general counsel, their CTO, and the head of strategic risk. Each had a manila folder sitting neatly in front of them. No smiles, no greetings, just quiet, surgical tension. My father sat down. Lucian didn't waste a breath. "Craig Hanlon threatened your daughter at a client dinner," he began, voice cold enough to frost glass. "Publicly, drunkenly, and you said nothing." Richard didn't interrupt, didn't blink. Lucien continued. "We paused the renewal as a courtesy, out of respect for the years of partnership Emily, built with us, but this is not a pause anymore. This is a reassessment." He slid a letter across the table. "Effective immediately, all renewal discussions with Stratasync are suspended indefinitely. We're exploring alternate vendors." My father opened the envelope and scanned it. Lucien, he started, but Lucien cut him off. No, he said sharply. You don't get to negotiate yet. You let that man hijack your leadership. You let him smear the one person in your organization who actually understands our infrastructure. You let him run a campaign built on arrogance and lies, and your silence gave him permission. Avanor's general counsel chimed in, tone measured but lethal. We've also received unsolicited documentation. Screenshots, reports, call logs. Craig's negligence laid out in black and white. Richard's eyes lifted slowly from the page. She gave you everything, he said quietly. Lucien didn't miss a beat. No, Mr. Carver. She gave you the chance to fix it. You chose not to. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of an HVAC vent was the only sound in the room. Then my father stood, folded the letter, and nodded once. I understand. And he left. No defense, no excuses, just the sound of a man swallowing pride on the way out. By noon, that letter had reached Stratasync's board. The phrasing was devastating. Dereliction of leadership, erosion of client confidence, breach of executive ethics. Brad Reed was pulled off a golf retreat in Scottsdale. Craig went silent. HR refused to comment. The emergency session convened at 3:00 p.m. Not on Zoom, not hybrid, but in person, in the top-floor boardroom overlooking the bay. And sitting in the middle of the table, unopened but impossible to ignore, was the sealed envelope I'd left behind. When someone finally broke the wax seal, the room fell still. Inside, 34 pages of timestamps, audit trails, emails, and cross-reference losses tied directly to Craig Hanlon's name. My father didn't say a word as the pages turned. Each one was a blade. Each line of evidence, a reminder of what silence had cost him. They opened the envelope like it was radioactive. The first few pages mapped every project Craig had touched in the last year. Dates, losses, false metrics, and client escalations. Each item was neatly cross-referenced with email chains that showed who approved what and when. There was no emotion in the report, just precision. Page 17 was where the blood started to drain from faces. It was the smoking gun. An internal message from Craig to one of his analysts. Avanor isn't checking, just scrub the numbers to match forecast. Next to it, I'd attached the actual feedback from Avanor that same week. We need more accurate reporting. Discrepancies are mounting. The contrast was surgical. By the time the board reached the end of the document, the atmosphere in that glass tower had shifted from denial to panic. And then came the last page, a transcript of Craig's exact words from the dinner. Don't worry, I'm sure there'll still be some role for you after we restructure. Maybe take a vacation. God knows Richard's not keeping you around for your charm. That was the line that broke them. You could almost hear reputations cracking like thin ice. Brad Reed tried to pivot first. This paints a very different picture than what we were told, he said, voice unsteady. But Nina Lopez, head of audit oversight, turned on him with eyes sharp enough to cut steel. You were told? You were copied on half these emails. You sat on this like a wet sponge and let it mold. Brad stammered, palms sweating. I didn't know the extent. Emily never brought this to me directly. Another director leaned forward, jaw tight. You mean besides the dozen reports she submitted? The risk alerts? The flagged metrics you ignored? Silence. My father hadn't said a word yet. He just sat there, elbows on the table, hands steepled, watching them unravel. He wasn't defending himself anymore. He was dissecting the carcass of a leadership team that had failed under his watch. Then came the knock. The door opened, and in walked Daniel Frisk, Avanor's lead counsel, uninvited, unannounced, carrying a slim briefcase. Apologies for the interruption, he said smoothly. But since this meeting concerns our renewal, I thought you might want to see this. He set a thick document on the table. It landed with a dull thud that made Craig flinch in his chair. The title page read, Internal Sabotage and Operational Risk, compiled by Emily Carver. The board froze. Daniel continued, calm and deliberate. We received this report from an anonymous source shortly after our renewal pause. We conducted our own internal review. Unfortunately, several of these findings check out. Altered SLA logs, duplicate reporting, unauthorized access. He paused. We're prepared to bring this to arbitration if needed. However, Avanor is open to continuing our partnership, with the right leadership in place. No one said Craig's name, but every eye in the room shifted toward him. His skin went the color of copier paper. Brad avoided eye contact entirely, pretending to study the table's reflection. My father finally moved. He picked up the Avanor report and placed it squarely in front of Craig. His voice was low, deliberate. You said Emily was emotional. You said she exaggerated. You said her proximity to me clouded her judgment. He pushed the pages closer. Explain this. Craig's lips parted, but no words came. He tried again, a weak tremor escaping. This isn't accurate. I can clarify. Nina stood, her voice slicing through his. You can stop. You've clarified enough. No shouting, no pounding fists. Just the sound of a career collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. Craig slumped back in his chair, realizing the same system that had protected him for years had finally turned its back. Outside that boardroom, the skyline looked the same, sunlight on glass, traffic below. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The noise that Craig thrived on was gone. All that was left was silence. The next morning, at 6:02 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Richard Carver, my father, not the CEO, not the strategist, just the man who had finally seen his company stripped bare. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried both pride and exhaustion. We want to bring you back in, he said. No preamble, no apology. Lucian hasn't signed with another vendor yet. There's a small window to save this. I didn't respond. I sipped my coffee and let the pause stretch, watching the early sun crawl across the skyline outside my apartment. There's no one else who can do this, he added finally. He was right, but I wasn't going to make it easy. I'll come, I said, on one condition. Silence. Craig is terminated, not reassigned, not on leave, fired, publicly. Before I set foot in that building, no NDAs, no back-channel stories. Everyone who watched him humiliate me will see how it ends. There was no hesitation, no bargaining, just a single word. Done. Then he hung up. By 8:31 a.m., Craig Hanlon was summoned to the 18th floor. The top, the glass-walled executive level where reputations either crystallized or shattered. He strutted in red-faced and exhausted, probably still running on fumes and denial. He didn't realize half the board was already there, along with HR and legal counsel. My father sat at the head of the table. You're being terminated for cause, Richard said, calm as a surgeon. Your access has already been revoked. Your severance is rescinded. You'll be escorted out. Craig blinked, then laughed. A short, desperate bark. This is a mistake. I was protecting the company. No, Richard interrupted, his tone final. You were protecting yourself, and you lost. I was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, watching through the glass as two security officers stepped inside. Craig's eyes met mine. Bloodshot, desperate, the kind of look that begged for an audience to believe the lie one last time. I gave him nothing. He stumbled as they took his badge and guided him toward the elevator. By 8:42, he was gone. At 10 o'clock sharp, I walked into the Avanor meeting room. The air inside felt cleaner, quiet, stripped of pretense. Lucien sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Beside him were Avanor's general counsel and lead strategist. No smiles, no handshakes, just expectation. I didn't waste words. I placed the updated proposal on the table, streamlined, transparent, airtight. The kind of contract that speaks for itself. Lucien flipped through the first few pages, tapping the paper softly with his pen. Page 4. Page 5. Then he stopped, uncapped his pen, and signed. No questions, no negotiation, just the clean scratch of ink that sounded like vindication. When the meeting ended, I stood to leave. Richard walked beside me in silence, the echo of our steps bouncing off marble floors. We reached the elevator lobby before he finally spoke. "You should have told me sooner." I turned to him. "You needed to see who they were without me." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Not as a CEO, but as a man who had just learned the price of his silence. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. He didn't follow. As I descended, I felt the weight that had been pressing on my chest for months lift slightly. Not gone, but lighter. I hadn't just won back a contract. I'd reclaimed my voice in a place that once tried to erase it. By noon, the internal memo hit company-wide inboxes. Effective immediately, Craig Hanlon's employment with StrataSync Technologies has been terminated for cause. The Avanor partnership has been renewed under new terms, led by VP of Client Architecture, Emily Carver. My phone buzzed nonstop for the next hour. Congratulations, shock, relief, curiosity. But I didn't answer any of them. I just sat by my window, watching the city breathe. He'd threatened to have me fired. Instead, he got erased.